This crowd rises to its feet. Vaccaro slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect! Garland one of the lane, lobbed to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
Welcome to the Chase Down Podcast, part of the Cavs media family. I'm your host, Justin Rowan. The Chase Down is presented by Fubo, the official streaming partner of the Cavs. Watch over 350 channels of live sports and TV, including Bally Sports Ohio, without cable. There's no cost and no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com/Cavs. It has been a busy 2 weeks since we last went live on the podcast. Got a little time off, a little rest and relaxation, got some exercising in, just focusing on my health and whatnot, and I am feeling great. I am so excited to be back, and I am incredibly excited to be talking to my co-host, Carter Rodriguez. Carter, how you doing, buddy?
I'm sleepy. You took all the wellness. I just had an event over the weekend. I am lit tired, but I'm well. I'm excited to talk Cavs. It's nice to be back. We were rusty getting things spun up again. It's, you take 2 weeks off, you forgot to do this thing. Sorry we didn't hit the 8:30 mark or even close to it.
A few technical issues, a little bit of rust, it is what it is, but you have more responsibilities in day-to-day life. So for me, without the podcast, all of a sudden I'm rested. I'm ready to go. I'm feeling great. And honestly, this was the first year I would say that I experienced true burnout from a Cavs season. Usually when the season wraps up, I'm ready to go.
Brother, I noticed.
Yeah, I'm ready to talk all off season long. I didn't want to take a time off. Having this 2 week break was amazing. I'm feeling great, and for the first time, in a little bit, I was genuinely really, really excited to podcast. I didn't even have my normal pre-podcast anxiety. I was so excited to be back.
Yeah, it is nice to be back. Obviously, we might have taken 2 weeks off, but boy, the Cavs sure didn't get to. They've had a lot of stuff going on, and it'll be nice to talk about it with a little distance as opposed to doing post emergency pod. We have a little gap here.
Yeah, and honestly, I think that's beneficial. I think, whether it's NBA teams doing their evaluations at this time of year, sometimes you just need that little bit of space. You need a little bit of breathing room from the season that was, and that kind of day-to-day grind of preparing for each and every game. And obviously the biggest change since we last recorded is JB Bickerstaff is no longer coach of the Cleveland Cavaliers. I think when you look at his tenure with the Cavs, overall, it was an incredibly successful hire. He took the Cavs from where, a very low starting point to turning it around from being one of the worst defensive teams in the league to consistently one of the best defensive teams in the league, bringing them to the postseason, even though, would have liked to have made the playoffs in that 21-22 year. A lot of injuries, kind of littered throughout his whole tenure, but going from the postseason to a first round appearance to winning a first round series, winning the first game 7 that we've seen with this core, winning a road game in Boston. There's a lot of successes, but I think you said it well after we podcasted after game 5, where, this was kind of the first postseason or the first season in general where, it wasn't linear. There wasn't necessarily kind of that step forward in making the offense have more wrinkles and maximizing the talent that they had. And obviously there was a lot of valid reasons for it. And, the NBA is a tough business, and sometimes coaching is kind of the easiest thing to turn around. But I think when you look at the entirety of his time with the Cavs, it was a very successful one.
Yeah, I mean, I really liked having JB as the coach of the team. I understand moving on, but you go look at it, and he is the 5th most tenured coach in franchise history. Coached 329 games, only behind Fitch, Wilkins, Brown, and Fratello. So he was here longer than Ty Lue was here by over 100 games.
Wow.
He is the 6th best winning percentage in franchise history. He's also the 5th winningest coach in franchise history. 5-year tenures are very long. So I think there's, sometimes when a coach gets let go, there is a general air of that was a miss. I don't think that can apply here. I think JB was kind of an unquestionable win. And getting 5 years into a tenure with any team is very, very hard. I think there were only 3 coaches that had more time with their team than JB had with the Cavs that were head coaches in the league right now. I forget the exact number. So, again, I think to your point, like I always felt like he was a coach who scaled up in terms of what he was doing schematically as his resources scaled up. I think last year was the first year where I didn't really see that scale. So, it does make sense that, they might try to look in another direction, but like unquestionably, like it's one of the hardest things to do is to get decent when you're not decent. And, like it's not like the Cavs had a bunch of, especially prior to Donovan getting here, it's not like the Cavs acquired a bunch of like no doubt stars. People even had questions about Mobley. People certainly had questions about guys like Darius, about Lauri Markkanen, about Jared Allen, just ceiling, about Okoro. It's not like they didn't draft Wembanyama and just immediately vault into like, oh, they need to be a contender status. Like I think he had to work them there. And obviously you give credit to the players, but you have to give credit to the coaching staff in a spot like that, because a lot of coaches get talented young guys and don't go anywhere, or need to trade for, or need to flip all those guys for veterans to get decent. We didn't have to do that. We were able to have a comparatively linear growth, and you lay a lot of that success at JB's feet.
And even, some compromises of, okay, we're going to try to implement some more offensive pieces, or is the defense going to be able to hold up? Are we going to be able to do that with Donovan Mitchell and kind of have a successful defense with two small guards, right? Like, I think there was a lot of successes there. And then, what makes me so excited for talking about this offseason is it's a major inflection point for the Cavs. This is not going to be a straightforward offseason. None of the decisions that the Cavs are going to make are straightforward. And honestly, like this is an interesting point, because this, we've kind of gone through it as a podcast here. We started doing this podcast when the Cavs were going to the finals, right? They were a contender. Went to the bottom of the lottery and trying to build your way up from there. This is a very, very delicate and difficult part of team building, where there is no guarantee that the moves you make are going to be a step forward. When you're a bad team, when you add talent, even if the fit is wonky, you're going to see some improvement in general, just because, talent ends up resulting in a few more wins. When it comes to the Cavs now, you look at this coaching change, and obviously, there's a mentality of, all right, we're going to do this in order to change how we're using guys. We're trying to maximize the talent that we have in a different way. That doesn't necessarily mean the successes of the past are going to carry over, right? Like, I think sometimes that's disrespectful to the coaches that are on the way out, where we just assume, all right, all the defensive principles, everything they did well is still going to be there. And, you bring in a new coach that's going to have a different offensive philosophy, and we're just adding to our previous successes. There's no guarantee of that. The Milwaukee Bucks were a great example of that. And the same thing is going to happen from a team building standpoint as the Cavs evaluates up and down the lineup, from the core forward to the guys at the end of the bench. You might make moves that, consolidate talent or bring in new talent, utilizing the mid-level exception, utilizing a first-round pick, whatever it may be. You may get more talented and not improve as a team. And I think that's what makes this such a fascinating offseason.
Yeah, I did want to sneak a couple more JB notes in, because I really was fond of his tenure, and you could tell the organization was really fond of JB just based on the reporting, based on Koby's press conference and stuff. So again, I don't think this is an unhappy divorce by any means, at least from the public side of things. And one thing I will say about JB, I think he should get a lot of credit for how flexible he was willing to be with his roster. There's a lot of coaches who are like, I only want to coach this way. I only want to play this way. And GM, I need you to go get me players that fit the style I want to coach. And I felt like, again, I go back to how ballsy it was to start Lauri Markkanen at the 3 just 3 years ago. And like how neither of us liked that idea very much.
No, we hated it.
But it was like just such a, like, for a guy who, like, defensive coaches are kind of famously known for not thinking outside of the box on offense. I thought he just has to get a lot of credit for those kind of wild swings that, like, ended up making contact and not being orthodox to a fault. Like, and adapting his defensive personnel to who was on the floor. I don't know. I thought early on in his tenure, he had this reputation for being a very orthodox coach. Maybe not a bad coach, but a coach that had an orthodoxy and wasn't going to depart from it. And like, much like it often happens with coaches, I feel like he didn't really get much credit for the ways that he varied from that.
Yeah, absolutely. And coaching is something, and as we pivot here to kind of the Cavs coaching search and preferences, this is going to be one of those spots where we sit in front of these mics and we're here to give our opinions. I don't have a ton of opinions when it comes to this, because coaching is a spot where I just never feel comfortable weighing in at a high level, right? Because we don't know everything that's going into it. We don't know how tasks are assigned throughout a coaching staff. And I think, from an outsider perspective, it's easy to editorialize, and it's easy to, look at the product on the court and then work your way backwards. And it just seemed like, this was the first year that I think you and I were sitting here being like, what the Cavs need to do, and this was something we said throughout the playoffs, what the Cavs need to do is something we've seen them do before. They're just taking themselves out of it, right? Like, they are getting away from things that are working without the other team making them change. And this was the first year where that really was the case. And I think that responsibility is shared, right? That's, that's on the players, that's on the coaches, it's not on any one person. And I think people simplify it a little too much, where they just want to lump it all on the coach. But whatever the case may be, it just didn't seem like the roster was really being maximized. And with that in mind, do you have a preference, kind of looking at some of the reporting out there, do you have a preference kind of on what direction you would like to see the Cavs go with this next coach?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I'm going to be a guy who's going to throw out a bunch of names. You've seen the reporting. You've seen, Atkinson's name out there. You've seen Adelman and Nori. And, I haven't seen, Borrego. I haven't really seen too many names I don't like, or that I have like a visceral reaction to in opposition, which is like probably the closest I'll come to a hard coaching opinion for like a hire. It's like, I just don't like that guy's body of work. I've got one, by the way, and it hasn't been connected to the Cavs at all, but there is literally only one name in this kind of coaching cycle for any team that I feel very strongly against. And that's JJ Redick. Bless him, but I do not want someone with zero coaching experience. I love him on podcasts. I think it's great, but I also think fans kind of look at, here's JJ Redick explaining what play names are and what the intention of plays are. And that's great. And that increases the knowledge of a casual fan. It helps increase my knowledge and understanding of the game. But that's stuff that every single coach and every single scout in the entire league knows. And I just I don't want someone that has absolutely zero head coaching or assistant coaching experience. I don't know, man. I just think it's such a weird sport where it's like, Steve Kerr had zero coaching experience and then went and led one of the best dynasties of our era. You just don't know. That's why I look at like guys with track records. That's who I'm going to have more of an opinion on. I have some angst about, the assistants on, I think Adelman, I think you do wonder, is it because Jokic is great, or what kind of scheme stuff are you doing? It's like, those are things, but you just don't know. So it's like, really don't. I hesitate to have strong opinions on who it is, as long as they have, you go by the reporting, you go by reputation, and you do your best. I think in terms of what I want to see whatever coach gets picked. I'm interested in them talking about really going out of their way to get guys the ball with advantage. I felt like one of the disappointments of the season this past year was how often guys were going up against a set defense from scratch. Not catching the ball on the move, off a pin down, off, I felt like they just stopped running split cuts by the second half of the year, and I just felt like our offense got a lot more predictable, and Donovan can get you good looks and score against a set defense, but that should be plan C, not plan A. And so I think that's really what I'm most interested in hearing from whoever is hired is how am I going to use action to get guys the ball with an advantage on the catch?
Yeah.
So I don't know. Does that jive with you?
Yeah, I think that's pretty high on my list. When you look at some of the kind of rumored names, like when people reach out to me and they're like, Justin, who's your preference? And like, I don't really have one, because I think it should be whoever, has the best pitch. Like when you're meeting with them, I think the approach should be, even though every aspect of this team is likely going to be evaluated in this offseason, I would like to hear, how would you maximize the talent that is currently there? How would you maximize the two bigs? How would you maximize the two guards? Because if you have, creative ways to make what is currently here better, it's a pretty unconventional roster build, right? Like this is non-traditional. So if the Cavs ever decide, whether it's this summer, whether it's at the trade deadline, whether it's 2 summers from now, if they ever decide to change up what we have in terms of a core for a more conventional build, what you need to do schematically isn't going to get tougher as a result of that. So, finding the way to maximize the guys that you have would obviously, whoever has the best plan, go with that, right? Like you look at Kenny Atkinson and really what he's accomplished. Like none of the names that I've heard that the Cavs are interviewing are people that have, experience taking a team far. That doesn't, as you said, that doesn't necessarily mean
it's
that
a dry market for that, Like there's if the second Lou re-upped, it was like, okay, we're going to be hiring an assistant probably.
Yeah, and from Kenny's standpoint, what he accomplished was taking a team, basically what JB did, right? Like, let's take a team of weird parts that don't necessarily fit together and get them to the postseason. He did it more on the offensive end than the defensive end. And then, they brought in stars. Things didn't jive well there. In some ways that could be considered a red flag, but I often think, things not
That's
working
a beige
out.
flag to me at worst. Let me just say.
I'm just saying that things not working out, typically that's something you learn from, right? And then winning a championship in Golden State, there's some big personalities there as an assistant. And honestly, when you look at the personalities in Brooklyn, those guys they weren't happy with the coach that they handpicked to replace him after.
Well, I'll tell you what, if we sign Kenny Atkinson to be our head coach, you can be damn sure he's going to remember to start DeAndre Jordan this time.
Right. Like one of the central things was he wanted to do the correct decision and start Jared Allen over DeAndre Jordan. Right. Like, so I really I don't have strong preferences there. Just because someone hasn't proven it in the past doesn't mean there isn't growth. Right. Like we too often we talk about coaches like static commodities, and it's just not the case. They're people that learn from their experiences or don't learn from their experiences. So it's, the test is really, you're only going to find out with their next opportunity. And I think obviously that test starts with those interviews and the pitches for what they are going to plan to do for the roster.
I do really like your general take that like whoever has the best pitch, like the reality is like when you're hiring in any job, and when you don't have like a dead ringer, no doubter best candidate, the best thing you can ever do is interview well. Do a thorough interview process, consider all your angles, but also trust your gut.
It's free consulting. Let's pick the minds of a bunch of assistants too.
I'm asking Adelman, I'm asking Nori, I'm asking Atkinson. Okay, what would you do to make the two big pairing work better? What would you do if one of those guys was gone? How would you then cover those holes? Like, what about this guy? What about that guy? How do you think we can get Isaac Okoro more touches? Whatever it may be. Like, you should be asking all these kind of hypotheticals, really make them show their work, make them show their vision. Because, like, ultimately, you hear that coaches left and right are stealing each other's stuff. I don't think there's a lot of, like, plays that you're going to, you're not going to have, like, some. It's all about how can you apply your point of view to your roster? So figuring out what that point of view is, and how they can sell that point of view just as much, because that also matters. And you're going to learn a lot of that in an interview process. So I'm really excited to see kind of how different the team, assuming that the team does run back very similar personnel on the floor. It'll be really interesting to see how differently they play, because it's been a really long time, Justin, since we've seen the team change coaches without a horrible inciting incident, basically, of where the team has been horrible or wildly underperforming expectations. It's like,
or as LeBron said, that man was naked. One
you
of
know,
my favorite stories ever.
like there's like this is a very different like we like there might be a degree of like we're switching from Coke to Pepsi, where it's like maybe the team doesn't get wildly better, but they play differently in a way that makes their personnel more interesting or helps you learn something more about their personnel. And like it'll be interesting to see just how similar it feels with a new staff in charge.
Yeah, it really would be. And obviously, I don't know if we're going to get a one-to-one comparison. We don't know if it's going to be the same roster back. And honestly, even if the same roster's back, it wouldn't be a perfect one-to-one comparison because last year was so weird, right? Like when you look at the injuries that they had and just the ups and downs of last season, there is no clean sample sizes. There's no clean data. And that's a weird and wonky thing. But I still think, like, to me, the biggest tell is, and I think this is maybe a reflection on the team's expectation setting, or maybe it's a reflection of just how good the roster is. I think it's telling that 2 years in a row, we go, actually probably even 3 years, go into the season, expectations get set at a certain level on media day. You look at the end of the year, they reach those expectations each year. The goal that was accomplished, or the goals that were stated were accomplished, and it still felt like there was something left. It still felt like there was meat on the bone. It still felt like this roster could have accomplished more, and I think that's really telling. I think, I don't think that's all coaching. I think some of that is on individual players. As much as I love Darius Garland, this was a bad year for him. He did not play at the level that he needed to in the playoffs. He did not play at the level he needed to in the regular season. Mobley had an up and down year, uneven with the injuries and whatnot. Donovan Mitchell had a very rough start, a great middle, and then wasn't healthy. And I thought what he was able to accomplish despite those injuries in the playoffs was really, really damn impressive. Like, one of the big concerns people have with Donovan Mitchell when you talk about long-term future is he able to be an effective player if some of that explosiveness goes? And given what he was playing through in the playoffs and the way he was able to adapt his game and still, be an effective scorer, to me, like, it sucks that was the data point that we were given, but I think that's kind of an encouraging sign. So, we do have so much data to go off of, but I think it is telling that just like in your gut, you're like, this wasn't enough. This team could have accomplished more. Obviously, even the injuries in the playoffs, like I'm looking at that Boston team and how close we were in some of those games, despite the injuries that we had. And I still can't help but feel like we kind of let one get away from us there, and we could have
might have let a season get away, things just kind of broke wrong. And like, because I do think like, if they had been in better form going into the postseason, like they're probably locking up a first or second seed anyway. I'm sorry, not a first seed. No one was catching Boston, but a second or third seed anyways. And if the team had maintained their form from February, then I would have thought we were handling anyone other than Boston in the Eastern Conference, no matter what. So it's like, it just was a down year for the conference, indisputably, and the fact that your performance and your injury luck didn't really line up, I think it is a missed opportunity. And I think the franchise probably feels the same way. If I had to guess,
I would imagine so. Like you can have a successful season while still feeling like, hey, it revealed some stuff. It revealed that this core really does have potential. This team really does have the ability to get to the next level. And honestly, like, I think one of the things we've seen in this postseason is there's no team that's just lapping the field. Like, there is no kind of insurmountable build. There is no 73-win Warriors that just added Kevin Durant, and, you have to absolutely nail everything from a team building perspective to beat them. We're looking at flawed teams. Across the league, we are looking at flawed teams, and I think from a team
especially with that second apron looming.
Absolutely. It's going to get even more difficult. And, I've said this point before, but I think team building in the NBA is about maximizing the best talent that's available to you. And I think from a Cavs perspective, that's what I expect them to try to do, right? And, obviously you're going to have people that are calling for change for the sake of change. You're going to have people that are calling it because philosophically, the way that this team is built has been different from their preferences, right? And I think the Cavs are going to look at every single option, even though it's in an incomplete data set, even though, we have data that points to things working and things that don't. The Cavs are going to look at every single option available to them, but I don't expect this team to make a move just to make a move. I don't expect them to, sell a core player for spare parts that happen to fit better, because that's how you get like, Jay Crowder's going to absolutely change what we got going on. No, the NBA is about getting them as much talent in-house as possible, especially with the second apron. You want to get your team of the future, a team and a roster that you believe has kind of an extended runway. You want to get all of that in-house prior to jumping across that apron. Like, you have to get everything kind of set and locked in place. And, it's the responsible thing to do at this point is to look at every single aspect of the team and say, what can be improved internally? What opportunities are out there for change? And that's how I expect them to approach it. And like I said before, just because something looks better on paper, and even if you and I are sitting here agreeing with a move and it feels great, that's not necessarily going to result in them being better as a team. These things are tricky. It's not a science.
Yeah. We talked about coaching orthodoxy a little bit. I mentioned that about JB and how I appreciated that he wasn't, an overly orthodox coach. He just did what he thought was right for the roster he had. Same thing goes to the front office in terms of what I want from them this summer is you can't be overly orthodox. You can't decide what kind of team you want to have and just build that. Like, you can't in either direction,
Mm-hmm.
Like, remember when, and like, obviously he picked guys that just weren't good enough and it's whatever. But remember when Isaiah Thomas was running the Knicks and he was like, I'm not going to do all this small perimeter stuff. We're going to zag. We're going to get big guys. We're going to get Eddie Curry and play him at power forward. We're going to be big and we're going to go find big, strong, tough players. And that's going to be our identity. Well, guess what? You normally can't run a team that way because you can't go shopping at the archetype store and pick the perfect guys that fit exactly your vibe and just get them up off the street. Normally, you have to make concessions, and some of those concessions, you're often choosing to make a concession based on archetype or talent level. Because it's nice when you can find the perfect fit, and when you find those, you better pounce on them. But the rest of team building is making concessions and figuring out where you're going to rob Peter to pay Paul. And what I want from this front office is to not be orthodox in either direction. Not to say we're a team that's built on two bigs and two ball handling small guards. Like, if you just say that, then you're putting a real cap on how you're going to build your team moving forward.
Right.
But similarly, if you go, we can't do that anymore. We must, at all costs, change the identity of our team because we're not so sure about that identity anymore. Well, then you're putting yourself into the same corner where you're going to make bigger sacrifices than other teams are making. And it's like teams that draft for fit rather than best talent available, right?
Yes. Like, that almost never works out. Like, you take the best spot.
And again, you can go the other way too. You can have way too many of a position. Like, this is, like, I swear, like, what drives me the most crazy about the discourse around this team and around team building in general is the fact that so many fans want to live in black and white. They either want they have this idea of the way things should be shaped, and like then very rarely find me ways that that the team gets better and more talented, because we all know basketball is a talent-based sport. Like, untalented teams, less talented teams very rarely beat the team that is more talented than them. It's possible, but it's hard. And like, so it's like, I cannot accept living in the gray in terms of team building. And by the way, like, I would argue that the two of us are as close to like, staunch core four supporters as you'll find. I really quite like the pairings of Donovan and Darius. I quite like the pairings of Evan and Jarrett and the things that they allow the others to do, and how the guards complement the bigs and vice versa. However, I think if I'm running the team, I can't be sentimental. I should still be finding inroads to the best team I can possibly build, no matter how I feel archetypically. So it's like,
and
I don't
honestly,
know.
I think sometimes, in us trying to present data and stuff like that, I think people have kind of made assumptions about where we stand on all this kind of stuff and whatnot. Like, I think, just because the core four works doesn't necessarily mean that there's no way that they can get better, right? Like, even, looking at someone like Darius Garland, who, emotionally, like, that's my favorite player on the team. I'm very invested in him. I love when he's at his best, how he can play. It would be short-sighted for me as an analyst to sit here and say, there's no possible way that you could improve as a team if you were to move on from him, right? Like, obviously, you can look at data that works, and you still have to thoroughly consider every single option. What combinations work well, which ones don't, what options are available to us, what changes can we make in terms of the style of play to better maximize the talent. And, I think so often, like we've been pushing against these narratives that things like just flat out don't work. And I'm always saying, no, like, when you look at the data, certain aspects of this are working. Here's the combinations that do work and whatnot. And, I think sometimes because we get so caught up on that, people assume that we're sitting there thinking no better option is possible. We're just sitting here trying to maximize, like, when our intention on the podcast isn't to sit here and pull up a fake trade calculator and try to figure things out when it comes to basketball. Like,
we do that after we're done recording.
Right, exactly. But like, I think it's more interesting content for us to sit here and actually analyze the game, analyze what's happening and how you can maximize the talent that you do have, because ultimately, like, those tougher decisions on figuring out what talent you can bring in and what opportunities are available to you, like, that's the front office's responsibility. And like the hypothetical game, I just don't think it's interesting podcasting.
I mean, I would push back a little. Like, I mean, there is interest in figuring out what kind of pieces, if you're not sure about a pairing, what kind of pieces might fit better. Like, there is something.
Oh yeah, and we'll have. I think we'll have those conversations on this podcast. Like, because I think when you're talking about what fits and what type of archetypes work well with different combinations of players, I think that's an important discussion to have, whether you're talking about bringing in a reserve for when you're staggering these lineups and trying to maximize and trying to play other styles. And it also would obviously apply to, if you were to change up the core, different archetypes that would help make it work with whomever is back, right? But as you said, it's all about maximizing talent, and obviously we're a podcast that cares about maximizing talent. That's why we bring in the most talented video conferencing from Zoom. Support for this podcast and the following message comes from Zoom. 500,000 businesses connect using Zoom, a single platform for phone, chat, workspaces, events, apps, and video. Zoom enables real-time collaboration for teams around the globe. Zoom, how the world connects. Carter, I'd like to dive into kind of the data that we do have available, because we've talked about how, you have to make decisions based on kind of incomplete data sets. And I think looking at what we've seen over the last 2 years of data with this core, and kind of using that as the jumping off point to discuss different fits, what we've seen in the playoffs, what's worked well, what hasn't worked well. I think that's the most important thing. And I put together a little bit of research for this here podcast, courtesy of Cleaning the Glass, which, as people may know, filters out garbage time. But basically every single combination. I wanted to run through the various combinations when it comes to the core four in their minutes together from 2022 all the way through 2024, and put that side to side against the playoff stats, just to make it kind of for an easy visual. Obviously, as we cite the stats, we will be mentioning those specific stats for those that are listening via podcast, and for those watching on YouTube. Carter is so nice to put this up on the screen for us. Thanks,
yeah, buddy. You're welcome. You did all the work. I import. I hit add image and then clicked the image.
Well, you know me. I love to deep dive on the data, and I think, looking at it over the last 2 years, Garland, Mitchell, Mobley, and Allen filtered out clean garbage time. They've played 2,548 possessions together. They have a 118.5 offensive rating, which is pretty strong, and a defensive rating of 110.7. I think when you kind of look up and down the board, you see the various combinations that seem to, work. When you have just Mitchell or Garland with the two bigs, I found it really interesting that the offensive rating for either is 114.2 or 114.5. Like, it's right in that kind of below average range, which really to me speaks to, in order for the two big pairing to work offensively, at least with the personnel and the offensive schemes that we've had to this point, you really need to have both Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell on the court. And I think, as we saw this year, you need them both playing at a high level, because when there was a drop off in play from either of them at various points this season, that starting lineup struggled offensively.
Yeah, it's again, that's kind of the foundational concept of the core four, is like, all right, we got two small guards and we got two non-shooty bigs. The bigs are going to protect the guards on defense, and the guards are going to kind of juice the offense for the two non-shooting bigs. So, like, I don't find that data to be particularly surprising, to be honest. Like, no. You really do kind of need to be really dynamic with what you're bringing on the floor if you're gonna have those guys out there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. And, some of that, I think in the first year, that was the result of a lack of depth. I think this year, honestly, I still truly do feel that the offensive struggles that we had as a starting lineup had more to do with the guard play. Like, I think there were just times of the year where Darius wasn't as effective as he needed to be. There were times where Mitchell was struggling, particularly earlier in the year, and then obviously the few games that he played after the All-Star break. I think it just made things difficult. And, even the ripple effect of the wear and tear injuries that guys had in that stretch with Garland and Mobley out, where you had, Max Strus is having knee soreness and Karras is having knee soreness. That's going to impact their ability to shoot from deep, and that's obviously going to impact the offense. But, I did find that was interesting, and, I obviously the lineup data for the core four has been propped up a little bit by the previous year because they was just so strong together. But I do think that it's important when you combine the 2 years together, just to give you an idea. If it was a true 50-50 split, it would have been dragged down more. But because of the injuries that we had this season, adding a little bit of weight to how much time have they actually had together, I thought was important.
Yeah, I think it's certainly interesting. It's important to look at this. I do want to ask you, because, like, and as someone who really does believe in these top four, and is certainly not someone who's in a terrible hurry to move on, mm-hmm. Do you think there's something to the idea that you look at the playoff numbers, and obviously those are going to be the loudest and the noisiest because of the fact that, one, it's just not that many games, and two, you got roundly beaten 5 in 2 of your 3 playoff series. So, like, there's going to be some inherent, the lineup data isn't going to be great on those. But, I remember there have been so many just in regular season teams where we've gone, where their fans go, look at the net rating, look at the screen assists, look at this. And we laugh at them and we go, oh, you guys don't really know. This is like your regular season merchants. Like, how do you feel like the fact that, in 2 of these 3 playoff series, obviously loud, noisy, crappy data because of injuries, because of availability, etc. But like, does it bother you? How much does it bother you that, looking at that chart, the core four have a -7 net rating in their playoff minutes?
It bothers me. The thing that stands out to me most when I kind of take a step back and look at it in its entirety is that there isn't any combination that really works offensively. Like, at least over a large sample, it's not as simple as, oh, you just remove Evan Mobley or Jared Allen from the lineup and you play with one big and all of a sudden you are rolling offensively, right? Like, the only one that really, from a regular season to playoff standpoint, kind of where you had a transfer that had actually worked out, is the Mitchell and Allen only minutes, which is under 80. It's under 100 possessions.
It's
like, that's
so
that's
small.
Such a minuscule percentage of your total playoff possessions. But I do think that it just speaks to the fact that this is a team that had combinations that worked offensively in the regular season and that did not translate to the playoffs. And I think it's incredibly important, through the evaluation process, to assess why that occurred, right? Like, really, I don't know if this is the best way to phrase it, but it's the way that's coming to mind, and we're sitting in front of live mic, so it's what I'm going to do. I think, honestly, the offseason is the time for almost every party to involved when you talk about team building with every single team. It's the time to get a little bit selfish. Like, I think every player on your roster should be advocating for what they believe is best for their own individual games. And then from a team standpoint, you take that data and you say, okay, are there compromises? Are we able to, use you in a different way to maximize what you believe is best for your game? Or do we have to have, honest conversations with you and say, you know what, like, I just don't think that we can do that, right? Like, maybe Karis LeVert, as an example, wants to be a primary initiator a little bit more, and you go, well, we have Darius, we have Donovan, and we want to give Evan more playmaking and opportunities. So that's not going to work out, right? Like, I think your job and your effectiveness as an organization is from hearing everybody out and coming to those compromises.
And frankly, choosing who to listen to. Like, because everyone's going to have their own perspective. That's figuring out, and that's why like that.
Well, I think it's more who to act on when it comes to the information, because I think you still want to get that information from guys.
When I say listen to, I mean do what they do. Okay. Do what they're suggesting, and that's why like that coach hire matters so much, because their point of view is going to be what ultimately needs to carry the day. Their vision, and like figuring out where that person's going to need to adapt their vision to the feedback they're getting from the roster. Is like, are they going to say, if they want stuff that you already agree with, easy. If they want stuff that you're like, I'm not so sure that's really what's best for us, like, that's going to be your big challenge. But like, I think ultimately, like, what we're seeing from this group, like I feel like they did make progress, at least in terms of the eye test, year over year. For kind of that postseason performance, but like, it does bother me a little bit, Justin, that we haven't seen the offense be able to find. You look at that left column, those offensive ratings, and I think the lowest number is 114.2, and that would be the second highest in the postseason. Now, they played the Knicks, who are a tough physical team, and then they played two of the best defenses probably in the last 3-4 years in this year's playoff. But like, you do need to find inroads to successful offense. I think the biggest takeaway here, Justin, is yours, that if you saw a pairing or a trio where you go, offensive ratings 129 and everyone else is at 105, that's a thread to pull.
Yes.
I don't really see, looking at that on the right side of this chart, I don't see a lot of threads to pull on the offensive end of the ball. And ultimately, I think the reason the Cavs have lost in the postseason or struggled where they have in the postseason the last 2 years is because of the offensive side of the ball. So, like, that's where you either look at, you look at plussing up the personnel where you can on the periphery. You look at personal development and growth from the guys you have from your still very young team, and ultimately you hope that your new coaching staff can unlock things and get at least a little closer to your regular season offensive output, which is comparatively just much better. I mean, I don't know how to say it. Like, they're better. They score a lot more points per 100 possessions in the regular season than they do in the postseason. Like, everyone is going through dips, especially this year, but they shouldn't be this profound, this across the board. And I think like that chart to me is the number one reason why I think the Cavs were kind of right to look to see, like, hey, does a different voice get our offense where it needs to go? Because if a different voice doesn't get the offense where it needs to go, regardless of if the core is different next season, to me, like, that becomes a reflection on the whole thing you're building at that point. Because again, there isn't any trio here where you go, oh baby, that's it, more of that. Like, they're gonna have to they have to work their way to that with what they have. And like, step one is finding that first set of 2-3 guys that you're consistently over a large sample putting up 120, 125 offensive ratings that really make teams go, how the hell are we going to stop these guys?
Yeah, and I think the other thing, taking a step back and looking at this data, I think it's reflective of how there aren't easy decisions. Like, if you were to kind of move on from what the Cavs have, there aren't easy decisions, because I think in a vacuum, Evan Mobley, we know, like, from a ceiling standpoint, from a belief in what he can become, he is obviously, probably the most secure, the number one guy that you want to have and kind of build around. After that, it's Donovan Mitchell. He's a superstar. He's an all-NBA talent. But those are the two guys that are furthest away in timeline, right? Like, those are the two guys that, in terms of where Mobley is at and being able to contribute on a contender and Donovan Mitchell, that's the largest gap to cover. And not only that, when you look at the 2 years of data of those two playing together as, kind of the lone two of the core four.
The only negative one.
It's almost 1,000 possessions that they've played together. And their negative net rating of minus 2.3 is around the Brooklyn Nets this season, right? Like, that is almost a lottery team negative net rating. If you look at Darius Garland and Evan Mobley, and it's been phenomenal, right? Like, in the regular season, they played almost 1,500 minutes together, and they have a plus 12.2 offensive rating. The other thing that jumps out to me, and, one of my gripes listening to national podcasts and stuff like that is people will say, well, the data says blank about the Cavs. And one thing I like to pride ourselves on the Chase Down is we do our homework. We show our homework. We show what we're talking about. We're when we give an opinion, we try to, highlight both sides of it as well, right? Like, there may be things that I don't agree with, but I still want to at least thoroughly explore it and talk through the other side of an argument, just to make sure, all right, if I'm wrong, if I at least show
same reason I poked at the postseason stats.
Yeah, if I'm wrong, you're going to see where I'm wrong. The thing that I find most interesting is, there's, and you talked about it a little before, where you talk about the theory of the team is the pairing of Evan Mobley and Jared Allen covers for the guards defensively. And what I find really interesting is that the guards together, they have a defensive rating of 110.9 over the regular season. That's an elite defensive rating. In the playoffs, it actually improves. It is 110.2. I think that is a really important data point. And I think it, again, speaks to, okay, in theory, Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland should be very dynamic offensively. When people talk about issues that small backcourts have together, it is almost never on the offensive end of the court. And where their struggles have come in the postseason have been on the offensive end of the court more than the defensive end of the court. And what I find really interesting is when you look at the guard data with only one big on the court, over 2 years, almost 1,800 possessions, they have a 111.2 defensive rating, which would still be a top 10 defensive rating. In the playoffs, when you look at it, they've played almost 400 possessions together with Evan Mobley, and it's a 105 defensive rating. That defensive rating has held up really well with just Evan Mobley anchoring it. Jared Allen, a lot fewer minutes, only 81 possessions, and that's a 136.5 defensive rating. I think that kind of shows you when you get to those sample sizes under 100 possessions. But overall, I think the fact that the defense has held up well with both guards and one big, I think that that's a really kind of interesting data point to at least have in your back pocket.
Again, they ain't losing these playoff series on the defensive end of the ball.
Despite what some of the narratives say, like I hear a lot of, well, how the defense hold up in the playoffs. It only feels like the defense isn't holding up because you're so struggling to score offensively. That's why Jalen Brunson jacking up shots at an inefficient rate feels like such a backbreaker.
Yeah. So like, I think there is a lot of good data to sort through, but to that end, like, I still think, like, again, you're not going to you can't be overly orthodox. You do have to, Koby is going to have to make a decision, a little bit with his gut of like, do I think that these core four are going to stay -7 in a postseason series? Because if you really do believe that in your heart of hearts that the core four, when they're sharing the floor, no matter who we're playing against, are not going to have the ceiling we need to become a true blue title contender, then maybe your risk tolerance goes up a little bit.
Yeah.
For changing the team and maybe making more concessions on the talent level of how you're bringing things back to, plug in archetypes a little easier. I'm not saying that he should or should not feel that way. I'm pretty split, frankly. But like ultimately that's why you can't pot commit, before you've even drawn your hand. Because like that's where you're just playing too dangerous of a game. You're giving up all your leverage. And like, again, I think at every point, Koby should be a pretty unsentimental dude. Like he should make decisions based on what's best for the team. But like, and I do think, by the way, I think there are a lot of changes that you could probably conceivably make that would make this team better next year. But Koby's job isn't to make this team better next year. It's to make it continually better every year until they're a proper title contender. And like figuring out,
you want to be set up well for whenever Mobley hits his prime, and that's probably 3-4 years away. Yeah.
So like ultimately, it's all very, very interesting data. There is again, I think I'll say it again. I think that with this data that we're talking through and showing on YouTube, if you're watching on YouTube, I think it's more important what it doesn't show, and what it doesn't show is a silver bullet. It doesn't show a clear and obvious strategy moving forward, at least in my opinion. And that means that the front office is gonna have to choose how patient they want to be.
Yeah, and the thing that I find interesting too is as we've sat here and we've talked about, hey, the Cavs are staggering, right? Like they are doing that kind of thing. It's kind of funny to see, Yeah, go ahead.
What do you people mean that they need to stagger Jarrett and Evan more? I don't understand. They haven't rostered a backup center that they plan to play for 3 years.
It's
what are you talking about?
And like even in the playoffs, right? Like people, when Jared went down, it's now Evan's free. Evan struggled those last 3 games against Orlando, and he struggled against Boston. And frankly, like I think it ties into some of that regular season data that we saw. I don't think it's necessarily a coincidence that his 2 best games of the playoffs came with Donovan Mitchell out of the lineup and Darius Garland running the offense, because those two have such good chemistry there. But again, like I think if this was First Take, or if this is, a debate show, we could sit here and take that data and we could run in bad faith, right? And that's not what I want to do. I have zero interest in that. Like when you look at the playoff data, talked about it before. I thought that there was an imbalance in terms of how much playmaking responsibility Donovan Mitchell had in the playoffs. You look at, the touches that he had. He was averaging, 70 touches a game while Garland was down at 60. And like the funny thing is, you look at his playmaking in the playoffs, Cavs were shooting great off of his passes. They were actually shooting 59.5% off of Mitchell potential assists in the playoffs. The problem was he was only generating 7.9. That means if they were shooting 100% off of Mitchell's shots, he wasn't averaging 8 assists per game. And the assist to turnover ratio was below 1.7. Whereas Darius on 10 fewer touches, there was 10.3 potential assists per game, 2.52 assist to turnover ratio. And like, I just feel like just because, and again, if someone were operating out of bad faith, they could say, oh, Donovan was ball hogging or whatever the case may be. When really, this is more like cooking. This is more like cooking, or it's more like baking, which is just because you added a little bit too much salt your first time around doesn't mean you take salt completely out of the recipe. We're trying to find the balance that maximizes everybody on the court. And I think,
if you're me baking, you fail and then you're a loser and you should never bake again. That's what I tell myself.
And then you go buy it from somewhere else instead of making it
Hell
yourself.
Yeah, brother.
But I do think, it's instructive because I think when you look at the 3 best games that the Cavs had offensively in the playoffs, number 1 was game 2 at Boston. They had a 128.3 offensive rating. That was Mitchell's lowest usage rate of the playoffs, of the entire postseason. Their 2 other highest games, the only ones that went over in 110 offensive rating, were game 5 against Boston and game 4 against Boston, neither of which Donovan Mitchell played. Again, it would be insane to argue that, Mitchell was out there hurting the team. But I think you don't make it out of the first round without Donovan Mitchell's contributions on the offensive end of the court.
But to your point about the
stepping
health,
up when a lot of guys weren't stepping up.
But to your point about the health of the offense, this just goes to show that you really do have to look holistically. You do have to find the road to the best offensive rating. Donovan scored 50, and we didn't get to 100 points.
Right.
It all has to be a very, very healthy ecosystem, and the healthiest ecosystems, by the way, are both. How many times have we seen Dallas score 126 and then Luka and Kyrie score 70 of them? The ideal is that you're getting both. And that's what a healthy offensive ecosystem looks like to me is your Darius is playing point guard, things are running, but also Donovan has opportunities to take over the offense and go nuts when he's really, really feeling it.
And honestly, I think it comes down to structure. Going back to what we want to see out of the next coach, I think this is a team that needs more structure. I don't think it can be just read and react, because when it comes down late into games, we've seen, the offense devolve, right? You need to make sure that guys are consistently getting touches, that, whether Darius is playing on ball or off ball, that there is intention with every single set. That is not just 3 people being involved in an action, that all 5 guys know where they need to be on the court and, getting the ball with advantage, as you said earlier. I think that's really the most important thing, because we just saw in the playoffs, I think the 10 games of Donovan, functionally operating as the primary initiator in the playoffs, the fact that nobody else was really kind of able to get going, and his playmaking struggle and the assist to turnover ratio dropped down the way that it did, which honestly is in line with the playoffs in general. I think that just goes to show that you don't want to wear Donovan Mitchell down. You want to keep him fresh and get him easier looks, and keep him prepared so that he is able to come through and deliver in those big moments like he did against Orlando, right? I just don't think it had to be as difficult as it was. And that 10-game sample, to me, that matters a whole hell of a lot more than a 14-game sample in December and January, where the Cavs played 2 teams with a winning record. To me, that is more that's a more telling sample size, and that's more instructive. And it's just so funny to me that people that want to dismiss all the good that happens with the Cavs in the regular season and say, well, what about the playoffs? Well, then completely turn a blind eye when it comes to something like this.
Brother, it's orthodoxy over kind of outcome. It's orthodoxy over nuance. And I find myself the most as a fan, that's where I find myself the most frustrated, is these kind of just wild blanket statements, many of which are paired with the things like you said, where they say the data says, and it's what? I just don't agree.
Show your damn work, man.
Yeah, show your work. prove to me what we're missing, because I'm not really seeing any of these clear conclusional data points that everyone is saying. And while we're grumping, and since we're near the end of the pod, can I get something off my chest, Justin?
Go for it. I'll go too, but yeah, continue.
This is probably the best spot, because everyone who doesn't love us is already hung up by now and started listening to something else, because we're like an hour in. So like, I just am so worn out by these kind of goalpost moving, like, frankly, like, hyper negative statements from folks that are like smart people that I talk to, where, you know, like, I see 3 statements about the Cavs from people all over the place from this last season, is that they didn't feel like they were well coached. Okay, that's fine. You can have your opinion. You can believe that the team's not well coached, whatever. That the team fit terribly. I've heard smart people that I like have told me the fit is awful.
Yeah.
Okay. So
which again, when you break it down,
the
guards are better together and the bigs are better together.
Whatever. Let's accept it where it is.
Okay.
And by the way, I've heard that all these sentiments from the same people. So poorly coached, the fit is awful, and none of our young players have made the leap. None of our young players have grown and gotten good enough. And it's like, well, if the coaching is bad and the roster fit is bad and the talent level is bad, how are we winning 50 games a year? I swear to God, I would have killed to win 50 games a year 3 years ago. And like, everyone is just so damn bored by it. And I don't understand why there is no room to acknowledge that one of those things, at least one, if not 2 of those things, must not be true.
Yes.
If we're winning 50 games a year. I don't get it. I don't get it. And by the way, we haven't even been healthy for any of these seasons. We've been one of the most beat up teams in the league. So
I will say, I'll take what we had 2 years ago, which was, we missed some time. We got to, inflate our player games missed with Ricky Rubio, which was great for my persecution complex. Like, I was able to, just completely put that on, and Dylan Windler helped out too. He did his part. But at least when the guys were on the court, they were healthy, right?
Yeah, man. Hurt, poorly coached, untalented, and badly fit, and somehow we're winning 50 games. Someone must have sacrificed some goat or something to get this team to win all these games that I've been missing.
And people that say, since Mitchell got there, Garland regressed, Mobley regressed. No, Mobley averaged career best in absolutely every single category. Last year was the best year of Garland's career. He scored at the exact same rate at higher efficiency. The assist-to-turnover ratio was second behind Nikola Jokic among high-usage players, and his defensive metrics went up across the board. Yeah, the assists went down a little bit because you had Donovan and Mobley sharing larger, increased playmaking roles. That, And it's the funny thing, like, this is why we bring out the data for the last 2 years and we dive into it, because I think there's interesting things that you can take away. But as you said, there is no magic bullet. When you get to kind of these anecdotal statements, like, you look at that record again. They only played 2 winning teams. It was Orlando and it was Milwaukee. Milwaukee just fired their coach, and I would dispute the fact that they were even a winning team, because after they fired Adrian Griffin, they had a losing record and lost to a bunch of bad teams. That was not a good team. On the other side, if you wanted to operate in bad faith, you could sit here and you'd say, what were the Cavs' best wins of the season? They beat Boston. They beat Dallas twice. They beat Philly with Embiid. They beat Denver. They beat Minnesota. Know who didn't play in any of those games? Donovan Mitchell. But it would be insane to argue that Donovan Mitchell was hurting them.
And none of those people that are telling me how bad the roster is and how poor the fit is and how bad the coaching was are all of them are like saying it's all Donnie. He's the only reason we're doing anything. So it's like, you got to pick a lane, guys.
Yes. Pick an angle, be consistent. If you have a belief, go for it. I am perfectly fine with this team evaluating every option that's out there, but I think that there's too much success here for anyone to advocate to move one of these players for role players that just kind of fit an archetype that you like a little bit more. That's not how you win in the NBA. And honestly, it goes back to what we saw 2 summers ago before the Mitchell trade, where we had Chris Fedor on the podcast, and he mentioned, yeah, Lowry's probably the closest thing to a core member outside of the 3 guys we already got. And the important thing when you talk about core members for a team, that doesn't mean necessarily that you are going to stick with these guys forever. When you look at teams like Boston or Milwaukee that have had consistent cores but made slight tweaks to it, the only time they moved a player that was considered part of their core was for a piece that would replace them within that core, not for a bunch of role players, right? Like that's what it has always been. And I think that is going to be the mentality. And that is based on zero reporting. That is based on the history of how this team is operating. And I just don't think that the Cavs are a roster or an organization, I should say, that gives up talent, for fit. Like that's how you listen to the people last offseason that were saying trade Jared Allen for Christian Wood and Josh Green because Christian Wood can be a stretch big, right? Like I'm seeing the same equivalence this offseason. It's driving me nuts.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And, obviously, you never know what's posturing. You never know what's real, but
you never know what's possible either.
Yeah. I mean, first off, let me just say, teams always like there is this general idea well, they're stuck. And it's teams make good trades all the time. Teams make good signings all the time. They make trades that they win by a mile. Yeah. And by the way, Kobe's going to have to make a couple of those. He's going to have to win a few transactions if he wants this team to keep pushing, no matter what he does. He's going to have to make a draft pick that hits, whatever it may be. And hits that makes the team better at a rate that exceeds the rate the rest of the league is getting better. This is hard. Only one team gets to leave happy. But we were one of the 8 teams left standing coming out of this season, and I'll tell you what, that postseason press conference from Kobe to me did not sound like a guy who was really sorry for how he built his team. It felt like a guy who's I mostly believe in this. There's some tweaks, and I'm not in any hurry just to make moves just to make them. That's the way I read it. Again, you never know what's posturing. You never know what's real, what's not. This is not a black and white league at any level, including the postseason press conferences. There's always shades of gray and politicking going on. However, for what I can do, it's take him at his word that he's I don't see any reason. I'm not in any hurry. And that just so happens to line up with a lot of my beliefs, which makes it easier. But we'll see. We'll see. Ultimately, all I can hope is that this team does things in the best interest of the team and not to satiate some concept or some orthodoxy.
Yeah. And, I think the other important thing to keep in mind too is you might have long-term concerns. Maybe their confidence.
I have some.
Maybe the confidence in, the long-term viability of the score has changed. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to act this summer, right? The patience is a virtue, and you have to wait for the right opportunity. And, maybe you do want to see certain aspects under a different coaching staff. Maybe you want to see, what it looks like with certain guys healthy, right? You just because your long-term confidence is shaken. Even me as a Darius Garland believer, my confidence level's gone down a little bit, but just because, that was a really rough season. I think
gotta take in the data.
I think it was primarily injuries, but it would be, it wouldn't be responsible for me as an analyst to, just completely bank on, my emotional attachment to a given player. And
this isn't the Darius Muse podcast, we're going to have nuanced takes.
Yeah, exactly. So, if my confidence is shaken, I understand why other people would have their confidence shaken because their starting point wasn't as high as mine. Just I think it's important to keep in mind that when we're talking about a starting point for the Cavs as they go into this offseason, we have a core that the data says over 2 years, they are better together than apart. When you look at the guard data, they are better together than apart. Offensively, they are better with both guards on the court than when it's just one of them. When you look at the bigs, they are better when they are together versus apart. And I think that is a very, very important to keep in mind. And then from there, you evaluate all options. You evaluate every avenue to make yourselves better, both in the short term and the long term. And that's what I expect the Cavs to do.
Hell yeah, brother. We went over an hour on the first episode back. Don't get used to it, pal.
Don't tell me that. I love that. I love doing the one podcast weekend. Honestly, I think this is where we're at our best. I think we're at our best when we're talking about kind of the macro trends and what's going on in
measured analysis for 55 minutes and unhinged ranting for the last 5, yelling at the fan base.
Baby, it's exactly where I want to be.
Feels right.
There is nowhere in the world I'd rather be than behind this podcast, diving into data and ranting like a goddamn lunatic. Big thanks to everyone that tuned in live on YouTube. It is so great to be back. We will be diving into some draft coverage a little later this month. NBA draft's coming up, man. We got to figure out some stuff there. Big thanks again to everyone on YouTube. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. Click the notification bell so you know when we're going live. If you're listening via podcast and you want to support us, leave us a rating, a review, subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, and help cook those books. If you want to be part of Chase Down's exclusive Discord chat, send a screenshot of that review to chasedownpod@gmail.com. However you choose to support us, we really do appreciate it. Make sure you guys are staying safe out there. Until next time, go Cavs.